Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to the Future History Project and the ongoing biography of Isaac Asimov. And last time we left him around 1951-ish. He had got a position at Boston University, and uh, by the end of 1951, I don't think I made this fully clear, but he did start out with assistant professorship, but by the end of the year, 1951, he had gained the title assistant professorship. And also during the year, uh, January 1951, Gertrude, his wife, was pregnant and eventually gave birth to David, their first child and son. He was premature in size, not premature in time, so it took a little while for him to be well enough for them to take home. And he also started writing. He wrote novels in 1951, juvenile series called David Starr, named after his son. And also in just before that, 1950, I don't think I mentioned, he had his first pizza in late 1950, in December, middle of December 1950. And he wrote in his journal, his diary, found it delightful. And also, beginning in February 1952, they got their first TV, and his favorite show was Your Show of Shows. And in 1952 as well, he wrote The Martian Way, and that was with Joseph McCarthy in mind, who he detested. But he wasn't sure if a lot of people actually saw that, but he had him in mind for that. And H.L. Gold, Horace Gold, took it, but only if Asimov put in a female character, and so he actually did. But he put it the character shrewish wife of one of the characters. And it appeared in November, I believe, 1952 in Galaxy. And also at the same time, Gold wanted a robot novel, and the suggestion was to write a robot where a mystery, or that where there is a problem between robots taking away jobs and economics, economic downfall because of it, and problems. But he didn't quite want to do that part of it. He sort of sidesteps it a bit, but he did write. He started Caves of Steel, which is an Elijah Bailey novel, and R. Daniel Oliva as the human-looking robot. And in 1952, his income was $8,550, and I think I looked that up at some point, and it was like a hundred and some, I think, $1,000 in today's money. And he kept saying all the way through his autobiography that he didn't think he was making enough to survive. But he was quite stingy. He would call his publishers collect, and late at times he would take stuff to his publishers and have them post it and pay for the postage to other publishers, or it's just odd, very, very odd for the amount of money he was making. But I guess it comes from, he grew up with his parents, counting pennies in the candy shop or candy store, and during the Depression. But you'd think, year after year, he's seeing the income go up. You'd think it would make a difference, but it didn't seem to. So anyway, Gold ran the serial for Caves of Steel in Galaxy, and Doubleday took it for a book, book rights, and he got a $1,000 advance for it. And in 1953, his friend Frederick Pohl's agency folded, and he sold I think it's the National American Library, I think it's called NAL, sold the paperback rights for Currents of Space. Asimov sort of committed to it verbally, but Doubleday had Ballantine offering $3,000, but it was $2,000 that he agreed to with NAL. So they did honor it because Asimov did commit to it, and he did say that he would do it for that. So it was a lesson for him to let Doubleday or the publisher deal with the placing and the finances for the paperback rights. So with that, more or less, that ends the first volume of his autobiography, which goes up to 1954. And then we were beginning the second volume. And we open up 1954 basically with Gertrude again pregnant, which was a surprise to them because it took them a long time, or Gertrude a long time to get pregnant. And then so soon after, they had their second child. Robin was born. And he was still at the university. He was getting $6,000 a year at the university, but he got also a $4,400 royalty check from Doubleday, which was the most he'd ever received up to that point. And Caves of Steel came out with good reviews, except for one review by Henry Bott. He was now editing at that time Imagination. And he objects to everything about Asimov, basically saying that and especially that he jumps around the galaxy in time. And he thought that it was a silly criticism for Caves of Steel, because Caves of Steel is set in New York City. It's static as to location. So it was clear that Bott never read the book. But it sort of what ensued after that was sort of like a bit of a printed back and forth little verbal battle between Asimov and Bott, who I think we'll get to a little more detail later. But Robin was born in 1955, and they were found it the apartment that they had at that point was a little too small, so they looked for a house. It was kind of hard to find, but his earnings shot up in 1954 to $17,500 a year, and that's approximately $175,000 in today's money. Not bad. And 1954 also marked a year that he wrote his first nonfiction book, and other than there was a textbook that he co-wrote with colleagues on biochemistry. And he enjoyed the process of writing the nonfiction, not the textbook so much, but he found the process of writing nonfiction quite fun and enjoyable. So he thought he'd start doing more of it, and he started selling science articles to John W. Campbell, and he'd recycle his stuff. Like he'd use part of it for something else, for a longer, or it had a longer piece. He would make it into a shorter piece. And just recycle. He called it recycling the material. And he also, and he was still writing a lot of short stories as well, and still for the next few years. Yeah, and they bought a house. It was the first, and it was the first week they were there. They had their two of the worst snowstorms um, in decades, basically. And there was lots of snow, and it was a little difficult because they had just moved in, especially with the children. Um, and then also, this would be 1955 ish. I published The Naked Sun. He got $3,000 from Campbell to run it in Astounding and to be published by Doubleday. And he went to the 1956 World Science Fiction Convention. But at that time he had, this was the first time he had kidney stones. So, but he met there his future second wife, which was Janet Jepson, who thought he was very rude. But she didn't realize that he had kidney stones. And this is an odd little thing that in the book that Alec Novella Lee wrote is supposed to be about the golden age science fiction. It's like I mentioned in the review that there's many sort of minor mistakes in it, and this is one of them. He said he had gallstones, when he first met her. No, it was kidney stones. Slight things, but there's many of those in that book, which is a bit concerning. Yeah, he enjoyed the experience there, even with the kidney stones. He caroused and with Randall Garrett, they were good friends at the convention up to a certain point. They did have a split later, but we'll get to that eventually. Yes, and also in 1957, now we're at that with the university started having trouble with the administration, where there was grant money that was owed him, and he was trying to get it, and some of the administration were holding it back and not giving it to him. So he had an ongoing struggle that would continue with these same people for a long time, for a long, long time. Um, let's see here. Yeah, he started delving more because he was enjoying the nonfiction, so he began writing more nonfiction, and pulling back a little with the science fiction. And he published at that point 23 books, novels, uh, um, yeah, and collections and nonfiction. Um, and for 1957, his income was $23,000. So it had gone up, and that's a little over $200,000 in today's money, about two and a quarter thousand. And then, yeah, in 1958, the fights with the administration at Boston University continued, and it's because he, like, they didn't want him to do stuff, so he just saying that he didn't want to continue sort of lecturing, so he would not take a salary as of June 30th. And they thought, oh, that's fine. Yeah, you can retire. You can go. The ones the factions that didn't like him. But he said no, because he had tenure, and his contract said tenure. So he would say that he wouldn't take payment, but he would do, I think, one lecture at the beginning of the year, and any other lectures he would get paid for. But he would keep his title as assistant professorship, and he fought for that, and he finally did win. So then he began now working full time as a writer, in 1958, basically. Um, and yeah, he was writing full time, and he wanted a science column. Venture, who he'd been writing science for, had folded, and he branched out to other areas, into nonfiction. His nonfiction was chemistry, biochemistry, nuclear chemistry. He started with astronomy. began to read widely, and then he started doing biblical commentaries, Shakespeare, history, poetry. He began to do commentaries, annotated editions of these things. And in 1958, the Astounder, the new editor of fantasy and science fiction magazine, Bob Mills, asked him to do a science column, and that fit in it. It was something similar to the venture that he was doing prior, and it continued on. He did like hundreds of articles for fantasy and science fiction science articles, and every episode, I was gonna say, but every issue was done. So, and he was given $100 per article, and it started with 1,200 words, and then went to 4,000, and then in 1958, because that was 1957, I think it was, that his income was 23,000. In 1958, it went up to 31,500. And then also, we'll end at sort of 1960ish, I think here. And in 1958, he became better known, like through his writing. So he began doing television talks. American Chemical Society. He did a talk for WGBH. And he didn't particularly like the experience, because there was lots of rehearsals, and he didn't quite like doing the rehearsals. He liked doing the job, but he liked doing it fresh. And but he did it, and there was one actually asked time that they couldn't rehearse because there was something else happened. The rehearsals were cut, so he went in blind and he did it almost live, and he enjoyed it, and it went over well, and he wanted them to continue doing that, but they wouldn't. So he had to go back to rehearsals, but he didn't care for it. And then, but during this time, he was writing The Intelligent Man's Guide to Science for basic books, and in 1960 he finished that. So we'll end it there with the finishing of The Intelligent Man's Guide to the Galaxy. And they wanted it. Oh well, just a little more with that. They wanted it shorter, but they because they would have had to publish it in 2 volumes, which they eventually did, but they still even cut it by 30%, and he didn't really like that. He thought it should stay. So there was a bit of a struggle at times with publishers for what they wanted and what he wanted, but most of the time he tried to work within his remit and what they wanted. Sometimes they commissioned books. Other times he would write something and take it on spec, and that didn't always work out. But he eventually usually found a publisher, and ones that he didn't, he just recycled into something else, as I was saying. So yeah, so he's come quite a ways during the 50s. Like after the war, during the war, getting married, and then getting professorship, getting his PhD, getting his professorship or assistant professorship at Boston University, and then leaving it and doing writing full time, and having 2 children as well now. And during this time, there were rocky times with his marriage. There, routinely, he would say in his autobiography that the topic of conversation occasionally with his wife Gertrude was divorce, but it didn't quite happen. But he, as we'll see, it sort of grows over the next decade and 2, or a decade and a half during the 60s. But anyway, that's where we'll leave it for now. Around 1960, with the publication of, or finishing, The Intelligent Man's Guide to the Science. And we'll see you next time, BookTube.